encounter with offenders and very likely reduces gun violence and saves lives. So far this year, Chicago police detectives have cleared 129 homicides, which is a 54% clearance rate. And as you know, clearance rates for homicides have ranged between 54% and 60%. So far this year, a significant increase over previous years. Over the past weekend, Chicago police officers worked with violence interrupters and street outreach workers, as well as Chicago Public Schools personnel and various other city departments tirelessly throughout the weekend. Chicago police officers and these community members also worked in the community in several community engagement opportunities, as well as Chicago police officers coordinating with federal authorities and bringing forth any and all federal crimes we can charge, particularly, as I mentioned, with the guns. In contrast, Jeremy, I think you'll like this. Chicago Tribune recently reported that 94 people charged with murder have been released on electronic monitoring this year. In addition, 261 people charged as armed habitual criminals have been released back into the community on electronic monitoring. I'll talk slow because I want you to get these numbers. 534 people charged as felons in possession of a weapon have been released back in the community on electronic monitoring. 569 people charged with aggravated unlawful use of a weapon have been released back into the community on electronic monitoring. 33 people charged with vehicular hijacking have been released back into the community on electronic monitoring. And 53 people charged with domestic battery have been released back into the community on electronic monitoring. The reasoning for this includes the constitutional protections of the rights of the accused advocating for the rights to liberty. But doesn't the Constitution also speak of the right to life and liberty of victims and their families? Before I take questions, the question I have is this: who will join Chicago police officers in protecting the rights of the victims and the families? In case you don't know, the brave and courageous men of the Chicago Police Department are dedicated and committed, men and women, are dedicated and committed to this city. And they won't stop risking their lives to protect you. With that, I'll take questions. Yes?
Three questions for you. Thank you. The person who's in charge of putting people back out onto the street is the state's attorney's office. Kim Fox holding a press conference this morning as well on something unrelated. But there was one person in bond court yesterday who was in for attempted murder. Originally, his bond was set at $1 million. It was reduced to $100,000. He bonded out, then arrested again after ShotSpotter technology called police. He was arrested with a loaded Glock, and he was out on EM as well. Is this the type of thing that you're looking at and your officers are looking at when you're talking about violent offenders being put back out onto the streets?
So let me make sure I correct kind of the beginning of your question. It's the judges that release people back, not the prosecutors. So we work well with the state's attorney's office, particularly our Bureau of Detectives in charging people. So and the chief judge and the judges make the decisions on electronic monitoring. Sheriff Dart has chimed in on this and really ringing the bell, alarming all of us that the electronic monitoring system is not sustainable in the way it's being used, particularly for violent offenders. And so I just want to make sure we have a very healthy public debate about the advent of more people being put on electronic monitoring. So again, we're not judge, juror, or jailer here. We're law enforcement, and I recounted our work in protecting the people of Chicago. And let me mention this, and I really skipped this part. It's really important. 29 officers have been shot at or shot this year. So when I talk about officers risking everything to protect the people of Chicago, I literally mean they're risking everything. There are 2 officers currently now who were shot a week ago that's recovering from being shot by an offender. And you watch that body-worn camera video, which I advocate for you to do as soon as COPA releases it. It's chilling that these officers survived that deadly encounter with an offender after a shot spotter alert. So, I tried to answer your question kind of high level we're not picking a fight. We're talking about debating whether people of Chicago want violent offenders, murderers, and others back into the community, and in particular, the community of color. These people are going back to mostly communities of color who have, in my opinion, the highest victimization rates across this city. So it's a healthy debate, but it's not a Kim Foxx debate. It is judges have decided that these are the outcomes for people who commit violent crime, up to include murder, people we've charged with murder.
When was the last time, based on that question number 2, that you, Chief Evans, Kim Foxx, the mayor, Tony Preckwinkle, sat down together and talked about this?
Pretty recently.
All of you?
Yes.
And what came out of that meeting?
We're keeping that private. We're working together, trying to get some resolution.
Third question.
Can we have others ask questions?
Well, sure. We'll have third question while I pass the mic. There was an incident at Millennium Park that involved officers and pepper spray. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes. As you all have reported over the last several weekends, young people are coming to the downtown early in the evening on Saturdays. I mentioned Chicago Public Schools and others have worked with us to engage these young people. A few of the young people have been arrested. I think over the weekend we arrested 9. 2 adults were arrested with guns. I could just say this, encourage parents of these young people to not drop them off unsupervised by adults would be helpful to us, as well as any and all who have programs for our young people to keep them engaged in healthy behavior. That would be helpful for us as well. But again, we won't tolerate criminal behavior by young or old. And so we've taken enforcement action when it was appropriate. Now, we'll go to somebody else. Thank you.
Thanks, Superintendent. John Garcia with Channel 7. Question about the schedules for officers right now. I'm told that they're on 12-hour shifts with canceled days off or no unscheduled days off or something like that. Can you talk about the justification for that? Is there some imminent concern that would be reason for that? And how often is this something that you've had to enact in your term?
So nothing new here. Every year in and year out, schedules are adjusted to deal with the oncoming summer violence. The schedules have fluctuated between, either canceled days off or we would extend hours of their shift. This weekend, I think, speaks for itself on why would you need more resources on the ground. I think this weekend speaks for what happened. And then, as we approach Memorial Day, I think from a historical perspective, better to prepare for the worst than not be prepared. In addition, George Floyd's murder anniversary, 1-year anniversary, is on the 25th, on tomorrow. We don't have any actionable intelligence that would tell us that anything would happen similar to what happened last year, but we're preparing to have additional resources to move throughout the city in case there is some type of civil unrest. Any other follow-up question? Thank you.
Actually,
yes.
I'm sorry, Superintendent Charlie Wojciechowski from Channel 5, and you mentioned George Floyd's anniversary. Can you reflect back on the past year and tell me about the changes in policing that you've seen within the department and that you foresee as being necessary within the department that have come about as a result of George Floyd's death?
A couple of things. Chicago Police Department was well on its way to reform, being under a consent decree. We've escalated our consent decree activities. Over 111 policies have been put in place over the last several months. More recently, the search warrant policy has been put in place. We are working to meet scheduled deadlines, but more importantly, we're working to change the culture through training. I think as a high level, I think the best answer is we must embrace change. And likely the best testament to George Floyd's death is that we would embrace change. And just quite frankly, you know, a lot of leaders in law enforcement likely need to shut up and listen a little bit to the community, maybe more than a little bit, and their concerns, and listen for things we can do beyond, above and beyond what the consent decree requires to meet the challenges of police reform. So more to come. There's likely pendulum swings hard left and right. We are still understanding kind of what society expects of police officers, but again, the brave men and women of Chicago Police Department are dedicated and committed to not only embracing change, but to protecting the people of Chicago. Yes.
Superintendent Dane Placco with Fox 32. Can you foresee, are you going to be using this tactic of canceling days off and extending to 12-hour days periodically through the summer as needed? And also, how do you help the officers balance their lives in these situations? It's got to be, you have to be concerned about them being burned out.
We are, and we're very careful. You know, officer wellness is one of our key pillars of our strategic plan. What we've done this past week is given the officers one of their days off. This coming weekend, both days off will be canceled, and then we'll be back to both days off for a period of time. As you know, there are several days from looking back at violence and when it peaks. It's the holidays. For some reason, Father's Day is a peak. Then 4th of July is another high violence day, and then Labor Day. Although we could have flashpoints throughout that's beyond what the historical data shows, but Memorial Day weekend, you know, again, Father's Day weekend, and then 4th of July and Labor Day. Of course, with all of the events coming back, I think, you know, everything is open to being a little different, likely larger crowds. We want to make sure people celebrate coming out of the pandemic quarantine in a way that's as safe as possible, which means officers have to be on point and available to ensure that safety.
Circling back to some comments from earlier, you were talking about electronic monitoring. What are your issues with electronic monitoring? How is it failing? What are you seeing?
One of the primary issues, and I don't want to belabor the point, I think the data speaks for itself. I think Chicago Tribune did an excellent job in just laying out the debate and showing how more violent people are back in the community. And the discussion has to be around, you know, recidivism, you know, whether these people repeat violent crime. And also, you know, is it fair to have communities of color bear the brunt of people coming back that have been recently arrested and charged, which charges are approved by the state's attorney. That's why landing at the feet of Kim Foxx is just not, it's wrong-headed. It's the judges who have obviously made a decision about violent offenders being okay to be back in the community. I haven't heard that from the community. I don't think it's okay with the community that violent offenders are back in the community much more than they have been in the past. So it's a healthy debate. I hope there's some movement back to a more moderate level of people who commit violent crimes. I would argue people who are charged and the charges are approved for murder, or it's not healthy to have them back into the community. I know the Constitution says, you know, fair bail and bond, but it also says we all have a right to life and liberty. So that balance is where the debate is. What's that balance? Is 93 people charged with murder in balance back in the community? Is that balanced, is my question. Any other questions?
Madeline Kenny from the Chicago Sun-Times.
Yes.
So at least 12 people were killed this week and another 42 were wounded in shootings, making it for one of the deadliest weekend so far this year. With Memorial Day right around the corner, the kickoff of summer, obviously you usually see an up or a rise in shootings. What are you anticipating for this summer, and what do you attribute? I know we mentioned EM a lot today, but what are some other causes to the rise in shootings? And I have one other question after that.
Too many guns in the wrong hands is number one on my list. These shootings are done by firearms, so too many illegal guns in the wrong hands is number one on my list. Next would be we need more collaboration in the community. These young people don't have to resort to violence. They could decide to put their guns down. That's just not a foregone conclusion that they will be violent this weekend or the next weekend or the next weekend. We can make the case and then we can appeal and influence them to make different decisions. We want to work with street outreach, violence interrupters, and anyone else, the faith community, to help us as police officers engage these young people to make better decisions. It shouldn't be at the feet of law enforcement only. We have our role. I would say we're performing our role at the highest level. 165 guns over a one weekend was recovered by Chicago police officers, with every gun recovery a deadly encounter with an offender. And yet we didn't have any police-involved shootings. We recovered those guns safely without injuring anyone or any of our officers being injured. So we just want others to join us in advocating for the victims and their families of violent crime.
How do you plan to rebuild the trust within some of these communities? Some people feel like they can't trust the Chicago Police Department.
One of the things that building any kind of relationship, particularly when it relates to broken trust, it takes time. It's person by person, family by family, neighborhood by neighborhood. I would just say a clue, maybe even a canary is one of the things that we are seeing more and more people help us clear violent crime, coming forward with evidence. Those clearance rates, even last year we cleared more homicides than we have in 15 years. This year we're on pace to clear even more than last year's. That's because there are some clues that people are beginning to help us clear, and what that means is there's some level of trust being built, but nowhere near the level. We have a long way to go. It's just not the consent decree compliance. It's going above and beyond, interacting with people in various ways to build that trust, particularly focusing on building trust with young people. Did everyone get a question?
Superintendent Paris Schutz, WTTW Chicago Tonight. This next month, City Council is going to debate and possibly pass a police oversight ordinance that would have a civilian elected oversight board that could have the power to hire and fire the superintendent. The mayor has yet to come out with their own plan. But the one that's out there, is that the best model for public safety and for police accountability?
I said this at my confirmation hearing when I was hired. I won't weigh in on debates between the city council and mayor before it settles and approved by the mayor and the council. I have no aspirations to be the 51st alderman. I'm happy with my full plate. You want another round? Oh, I'm sorry. He had the mic, and then I'll get you as soon as he's done.
Just some comments about the North Halstead brawl that happened over the weekend. Your officers were assaulted in that. One got jumped on. What is your reaction when you saw that video and knowing that it could have been even worse?
Yeah, it just speaks to, again, the bravery and courage it takes to be a police officer in this country right now, and the persistence and the perseverance our officers have under most dire circumstances. Our officers just keep performing at a very high level. When they don't, we hold them accountable. But when they do, we ought to acknowledge it, yes.
On that point, do you expect to see the curfew enforced, especially with regards to young people downtown? And if possible, can we get an update on the Calumet Bridge crash?
So we don't want to paint all of our young people with a broad brush. It's not lost upon me. These are mostly young people of color, mostly young black kids. And only 9 out of several hundred led to an arrest. Their behavior led to an arrest. Most are just trying to enjoy the downtown. Now, we likely will need to pivot, and we try to be patient with the behavior, but we are in discussions now with pivoting to making an arrest sooner. So kind of word to the wise, behave yourselves. Young people, have a good time downtown. It's okay to be downtown if you are a young person of color, but the behavior has to improve with the few that we have arrested. Oh, by the way, we're not just making the arrest and leaving it at that. We've began going and visiting these offenders, these juvenile offenders that we arrest over the weekend, and their families post-arrest to see what we can do to change that behavior, what's called a custom notification. I mentioned that before, where we take services to the door of offenders that we arrest. We're doing that with these young people that we've arrested over the last several weekends to see if we can influence them with city services or other services, outreach, faith, community to make better decisions. So we're not just leaving it at that, but again, it's just a small few that's really casting the whole lot as something that it's not. Yes.
Speaking of North Michigan Avenue, since last summer, there have been police cars with the lights flashing lined up along the Magnificent Mile. Some people in the business community are starting to believe that maybe it's been there too long, maybe it's discouraging people from coming downtown. Do you think those cars have been effective, and do you plan to keep them there?
And it's just not my opinion. So we've heard that, so we surveyed the business community down there. We've taken a survey recently asking them that very question, and the vast majority like the presence, like the blue lights, want it to stay, feel safer. There are some that responded to the survey and acknowledged that maybe it's overdone, but the vast majority wants it to stay. We'll make adjustments as we go along, but for now, the vast majority won the day. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yes. Brendan, you want to update, or do you have anything on that? All we have is the adult, obviously, is deceased. We have witnesses who say the car just ran off the rail into the water. The young person survived, and that's the extent of the update that we have. If we get any more, we'll definitely push it out. Thank you very much.